Good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you all for joining us here on blackdoctor.org. I am Ellis Dean, the Director of Digital Programming and Production at blackdoctor.org. And this program is very, very special to me. As many of you may or may not know, I host a program called Clinical Trials in Black Folks monthly here on blackdoctor.org. And we are also at Black Doctor, we are starting a Clinical Trials Resource Center. And so you keep hearing that word. That's the fancy word that we've been hearing all around the country, especially in healthcare circles, and we're starting to hear it more and more in our kind of personal circles, clinical trials. Well, today is International Clinical Trials Day, and we, in partnership with Touch and Ricky Fairley and her wonderful organization there at the Breast Cancer Alliance, what we decided to do is put together a clinical trials town hall to help you understand what clinical trials are. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's happened in the past that were not really good for Black folks, but we're also going to talk about the future and why clinical trials are important. So before I hand it off to Ricky, there's a couple of things I need for you to do. Number one, I need you to let us know where you're watching from. We like to know where people are watching us from all over the world. So please drop that in the comment section and let us know where you're watching us from. Number two, if you know somebody that needs this information, please like this, share it on your page, tag a friend, let them know that this is the information that they need in order to help them with their condition, or maybe help somebody pay it forward by being involved in clinical trials so we can get better treatments and medications for all people, particularly for people of color. And then finally, if you have any questions, please drop those in the comments as well. We have a nice section here at the end of the program. I see you, South Georgia, representing. We got a nice section at the end of the program. We're going to get your questions answered because ultimately, this is all about you and getting you the information you need to be comfortable to make better and more informed health decisions. So with that, I want to let you know that as with my program and everything I say, when we talk about clinical trials, the three words I always say is involvement improves outcomes. And so we're going to continue to help you, give you the information so you can become involved. So before we hand off to Ricky, though, I'm going to play a quick video about what clinical trials are to kind of give you a baseline of where we are. So, short video presented by our own Dr. Eric Griggs, and he's part of this panel that we have this morning. So, Dr. Griggs, he did this wonderful video helping you understand really what clinical trials are. So, I'm going to play this video, and then we'll get back to our wonderful panel.
We'll never get to the gig on time now. I'll be able to play the bass tonight, right?
Sure, bud. I'll grab a bandage.
Irma Thomas? The Soul Queen of New Orleans?
That's me. I'll get you to the gig with a little detour. Hop in.
You're gonna need a wrist splint, antibiotic ointment, a bandage for the cut, ibuprofen, and a tetanus vaccine.
You know what all those things have in common?
They were developed in clinical trials. I know all about those. I personally led clinical trials for over a decade.
Many folks don't know what clinical trials are or how they work.
There's nothing secretive about them. There's about 300,000 trials going on every year.
We want people to know about them. What's happening?
Take it away, Doc Griggs.
My man Doc Gary's having some issues. His wrist's all floppy like a soaking wet tissue. His head is pounding and it's got a big gap. Sorry about that, bud. I feel like in phase 1, it's just a couple of folks. If everything's safe, then we widen the scope. The clinical trial moves on to phase 2. Lots more people and effects to review. In phase 3, there's a bigger collective. Gotta make sure that the treatment's effective. A stamp of approval means we're on to phase 4. Checking for effects when you walk out the door. Now here's your new treatment. It's proven and safe.
And I can rock out on a super cool bass. Yeah.
Hold up. We need to address the elephant in the room. I'm grateful for these medical discoveries, but this country has a dark history of people like me being mistreated by the medical community.
Sadly, you're right. Black and brown people were abused and lied to by the scientists and the doctors who took an oath to protect them.
It's little wonder that there's suspicion and mistrust around clinical trials and new medications within communities of color.
Absolutely, Miss Irma. And it's because of that history that we have protections in place, ensuring that trials are ethical and safe for all participants.
And why public health professionals, scientists, and doctors leading clinical trials are more diverse than ever.
That is reassuring. I want the best medical care for my grandkids to live long, healthy lives, but they need to trust that doctors will treat them fairly and with respect.
There's work to be done earning the trust of Black and brown people, but changes like these are moving us in the right direction.
Thanks, Miss Irma. This journey was really important. And addressing the elephant in the room made him a lot less scary.
Indeed. And now let's get you to that gig on time.
I love that. That's so great.
It was great.
Thanks for that, Dr. Eric. That's phenomenal. And I'm so happy to be here today, Dallas. You know, we talked about doing this a few weeks ago, and we did it. We're here, and it's such an important topic. And I've been visiting a couple of our pharma partners the last couple of weeks. I was with Damali last week, and I was actually at a global Merck meeting yesterday, and this topic is it's just coming up all around across every disease state. You know, my lane is breast cancer, but everybody needs this. And if you think about it, all of the drugs that we have pretty much were tested on 50-year-old white men. So guess who they work on? And so we're seeing all these disparities across all these other diseases, you know, for breast cancer, for everything, but it's because the drugs weren't tested on our bodies, right? And so we have to get into the science. It's so important that we participate. And I think it can be a little scary, but, you know, our research with breastfeed shows that the fear is really because we don't understand it. And frankly, even if you're not sick, you know, Black people, when white people get a cold, we get pneumonia. So eventually all of us are going to have something to do. We all have a cancer story in our family, or a high blood pressure story in our family, or a heart disease story in our family, or a diabetes story in our family. All of our families are, you know, people are getting sick, and we all, in all of these disease states, should be looking for clinical trials. And so we need to know about this before we need one. We need to know about this so we can educate our families before somebody in our family needs one. So it's, you know, we're so glad for you to be with us today and listen to these wonderful brainiacs talk about the science, because it's going to be our health. I mean, it's going to save our lives. And if you're not sick now, somebody in your family, unfortunately, is going to get sick and need drugs. And so we need drugs that are going to work for us. So you guys, yeah, you know, and I have some of my favorite people here, but I think, you know, why don't we start with you, Dr. Melissa, because you're the scientist in the room, and talk about why this science is so important.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I think this is a very important topic, and I love the fact that BlackDoctor.org is hosting this topic, because I think it's very important for this conversation to happen in our community. Yeah, so, you know, clinical trials, the history of it from the conception of just making observations that we needed medicinal therapies for various ailments. You know, it went from the evolution of simply doctors trying different things on their patients to what we call well-controlled studies. And then those well-controlled studies from time to time kind of getting out of hand. And this is what we talk about when we discuss, you know, how in certain cases populations were abused because we didn't necessarily have those regulations in place to, you know, limit sort of the concepts of some of our more arrogant doctors, you know, back in the day. But we do have these trials under heavy regulations now. And just as you mentioned, you know, because the trials, and now that they're under heavy regulation, are only being done, or have in the recent past, only been done in convenient populations where We are focused on the catchment or the patients, if you will, who happen to be going to large academic institutions, who have very well resourced um, payers who are able to afford, healthcare in certain systems. We don't necessarily have a good picture of the diversity of the global population. We don't even have a good understanding of the diversity even in our local communities, even in the towns and the states where many of these clinical trials are being held. And so then what happens is we find that we have population level adverse events. Okay, that's what they're called, where the treatments not only don't work very well, but they cause sickness. The treatment itself causes illness in populations of individuals because we didn't have those particular individuals in the trial. Because when you think about the phases of the trial, we're supposed to be monitoring patients for whether or not the drugs are causing certain toxicities. And so if we don't have the vulnerable populations in the trials, then we wouldn't be able to identify the fact that there are groups of people who have unique susceptibility to a particular toxicity. And so that's why it's important scientifically. It's a matter of rigor. It's a matter of rigor to make sure that you have a diverse population in clinical trials. And so we have to talk about this in our communities. We have to be a part of those studies.
Yeah, we do. Dr. Keith, what are you seeing in the prostate cancer space? Because our men are dying and, fast and furiously.
Well, what we've seen in the past that there was significant under-enrollment of Black men in clinical trials. And I want to be clear, is clinical trials, there's interventional clinical trials, there's observational clinical trials, and there are registries. So the one that, from the standpoint of prostate cancer, we want Black men to focus on interventional clinical trials. And when you look at those numbers that exist in the interventional space.
That's a big word. What does that mean?
So intervene. Okay. Intervene and okay, so I'm gonna bring it back down then.
Yeah, break it down.
Okay. So there's certain treatments where I want to intervene in interventional. I want to stop the cancer, in this case, prostate cancer, in its tracks. Okay. Then there's some that say, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to change your diet, incorporate exercise and some yoga. And then we want to see if there's a difference between the group that doesn't have it versus a group that does. Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking about the interventional ones, that's the one I primarily focus on, even though I have all the clinical trials. And what we've seen, and this is very important for us to say, we're very excited on our end, that in the past, years ago, maybe 3 to 4% involvement of Black men in prostate cancer clinical trials that are interventional. They're trying to really take care of, get rid of the cancer or stop cancerous growth. But what we've done is we created a tool called FinTrial. So each month, I go in to all the actively recruiting prostate cancer clinical trials, and I review them. And I look for those that are still actively recruiting. Then I separate those and put them into their diagnostic bucket. So what I mean is, if you have early stage prostate cancer and the doctor says you have intermediate or you have high risk, there are clinical trials that are specifically for that diagnosis. Now, a lot of our clinical trials are metastatic castration resistant, meaning that you have prostate cancer, it's moved outside the body, and the drugs that they're used now don't work. And so now they're trying to recruit people into clinical trials. Now, what's happened recently in our approach is that we're starting to get greater participation of Black men in prostate cancer clinical trials, from 3 or 4% to 17%. And recently, one of our partners just told us that they have 21% African American
That's awesome.
enrollment.
That's awesome.
So what we're saying, it can be done, but we have to educate. And this is like what Black Doctor and everyone on this panel is doing. We recognize that we have to educate if we're going to participate.
Yeah, we
That's a
do.
rhyme. You did, I don't know. I know you didn't mean to rhyme, but I think Dr. Griggs' video got you in the
Got me,
rhyme.
that's right. He got me on the right foot.
You're rapping, you dancing, you
I said, he got me on the right foot.
Dr. Griggs, you've been doing this for a while, and it's so nice to meet you today. So, what's working? What's working?
So, first of all, thank you for having me. This has been a fight. As you can see, even from the cartoon, this conversation has been going on for decades and decades and decades because of the distrust. The strides, and I will say strides, 21% is truly a stride, comes from the fact that we're able to have real candid conversations about it now. We had the metaphorical elephant in the room get smaller and smaller in the cartoon because we have to inform. The best way to deal with stigma and distrust is go right to the heart of the matter and have the tough and difficult conversations so you can dismantle and diffuse any mis or disinformation that's out there. The processes in place with clinical trials, I mean, things have been changed for a while and they're continually getting better. The institutional review boards, the system of checks and balances, the clinical trial monitors, the CRAs that go all over the country to make sure that things are done in an ethical and equitable. We're working on the equity part by encouraging us to be involved, but the more candid and honest and real conversations that we have with the community in community language. I tease with Ellis all the time that, I have this MD, but I live in the lane of health literacy. People can execute what they understand, and it's whatever means is you deem necessary to reach the audience. If you have to go to cartoons, if you have to draw, but if you have to start I typically like to start the discussions with the points of contention. I don't trust clinical trials because that's syphilis. They're putting syphilis in people on, and to explain that it doesn't work that way, and this is exactly what happened, and have you redirect the emotion so that it can be something positive, so they can see all the benefits of clinical trials, the difference in the phases, the continuing study, the compassion studies for people to continue getting their medication for free. Before we had the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, I was really, really pushing clinical trials here in Louisiana so people could actually receive healthcare. People don't understand that actually, if you don't have a doctor, you'll get carte blanche treatment while you're on the clinical trial. And should something else happen, then we'll take care of that too, to make sure you're taken care of. So it's candid conversations and building trust. And as we know in our community, the best way to build trust is you got to spend some time talking.
Oh, and I just want to make one comment on Dr. Griggs. And you said a very important point, that care, Black people will get the best care if they participate in a clinical trial. Yeah. So I just want to just highlight that again, how important that is.
And we have better outcomes. We have better outcomes. People who participate in trials have better outcomes. And, I love all of these things. I think that, we've just been showing patient stories as a way to talk about trials. And so when a breastie hears it from another breastie, her experience, and that's the work that we've been doing even with Carmen at Pfizer, is to, and we'll show a video later on that, but just having a breastie talk about her experience engages another breastie because they can see someone doing it, and so Carmen, what are you guys doing besides helping me out?
Well, always happy to help you out, Ricky, but just like you said, it's so important to share stories. So at Pfizer, we try to provide a number of resources. So much like Dr. Crawford was talking about FEN's website, we also have a website, PfizerClinicalTrials.com. And most of the sponsors or pharmaceutical companies also offer places where people can have resources to learn about what clinical trials are, understand the phases, and identify a trial that may be right for them, because there's so many, the information can be overwhelming. So it's important that they are shared in lay terms and people can search and share it with their family members. So that's also very important. And the storytelling is critical because I have my own story about participation in the clinical trial, but I'm one voice that reaches a few. through a number of these channels like blackdoctor.org and When We Trial, the sharing of the stories of the breasties has been so critical and so powerful to engaging new audiences who in the past may not have thought a trial was for them based on the experiences that they've had in the doctor's office as they are considering how to manage their diagnosis and find an intervention. So those are a few of the things that we're doing. And we're also trying to start from the inside and train our colleagues around the importance of diversity in clinical trials, train our sites on unconscious bias because it does exist for everyone. So invite them into the conversation and not only empower our patients through information, but empower our healthcare professionals who are serving our patients to have thoughtful conversations as they are walking them through the process and consenting a patient as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's so awesome. This is all such great work. I spent the last couple of days at a Merck global meeting with people from all over the world. And in so many cases, they can't even quantify the disparities of diseases in other countries like we can here in the States. But Damali, I was so, enthralled by all the work that's being done all over the world at Merck to get people into trials. And do you want to speak to what you guys are doing a little bit?
Absolutely. And first of all,
besides helping me too.
Besides helping you, and I would like to be, thankful for this platform. I think this is one of the steps we get to reach out to the community and bring clinical trial awareness to, communities that have been historically underrepresented. I would say that for Merck internally, we do recognize that there are barriers to clinical trial participation, and we recognize that it's going to take time as well as collaborative efforts to develop those practical solutions. So we do have several ways of how we are solving for these barriers, and one of the important approaches is to have those community relations, partnerships and collaborations. For us, this means building relationships with leaders or trusted representatives. They could also be influencers, patient advocacy groups, organizations such as Touch, as well as those community-based organizations and institutions within the communities. These can help to raise awareness about clinical trials. So we do know that with more awareness about the clinical trials, such partnerships are a good example of how we can equip the community with better understanding of the clinical trial process and also be able to volunteer and participate in a trial. But then on the other side, we also do have another approach is to really diversify the clinical research workforce. This is important for us to increase the number of investigators, as well as site staff from underrepresented communities at sites. And this is with the goal of having clinical trials being offered to more people from communities of color. This approach, I think, will help us. We do know it will help to solve for never being asked to participate in clinical trials due to implicit bias, as Carmen did allude to. And it can help to solve the mistrust and as well as some myths that we do have within our own communities. So we've heard from patients that they would like to hear about clinical trials from, or receive the information from someone who looks like them. And we do believe that having that diverse workforce can be the trusted voice. So those are a few approaches that we are working on.
Ricky, can I ask you a question? When we talk about diverse workforce, and Dr. Griggs was very important because he's like boots on the ground. The feedback that we're getting from a lot of patients are once we get them, so the advocacy groups are getting them to the clinical trial site. Once they get to the clinical trial site, that implicit bias or that lack of cross-cultural communication or is there, and are there programs, especially with the large pharma groups that are here today, that help better train these clinical trial sites, because the house is on fire. So it's going to take us a while to get increase the workforce, a diverse workforce. So what can we do today that groups like Ricky and I and Dr. Graves can do to help guide that patient on this journey?
So if I can just interject really quickly, one of the things, first of all, for our audience tuning in, implicit bias, meaning you're coming into whatever situation already with an expectation of what's going to happen, and making a judgment on whoever's in front of you. That's implicit bias. And what we're talking about is how do we train, I would say on our side, our colleagues on understand that that's going to be there, not just from our perspective. And that's usually typically what we talk about is from the scientist out, right? And not prejudging. But the most important thing is the implicit bias or the preconceived notions or what you're thinking when you walk into the doctor's office. Because a lot of times, even though we'll have the same, and having gone through the COVID buzzsaw pandemic that we went through and having to do it very publicly, Ellis and I very regularly and publicly did it. I think the kids say, you want the smoke? Yeah, we got all the smoke. Even though we look like our community, what would happen is they come in thinking that you're part of the bad guys. So if you don't speak in terms now, globally, I'm not sure about. I know there are a lot of different programs with the CDC where you can talk about cultural competency, health literacy, the whole nine. What I tell my students and my colleagues, you need to talk to the community as though you would talk to your friends, your family, your grandmother, all those big words. Pretend you're leaving them.
Your 6-year-old. You talk like you're 6-year-old. You have to talk. I really believe that our illiteracy is breeding health inequity. It's breeding it because we don't even know what we don't know. We don't even know what to ask for. And so that's why I say, if you can't spell the word, don't say it. If you don't think your audience can spell the word, don't say it. Break it down and help us, because I really believe that the education and the understanding of how it works is really going to spell the trust. I mean, the trust is partly the history, but it's also that I'm not going to jump off a bridge if I don't know how deep the water is. Yeah. I'm not going to walk and open this door if I don't know what's on the other side of it. It's just this knowledge of how does it really work? And when you break it down and say, that how you started the video, Dr. Griggs, that Advil you took last week, it was in a clinical trial. The heart medicine I gave my dog Harper that's sitting right here was in a clinical trial. And so it's that simple. And when you say those words and make it simple, people don't want to die. I'll sign up. I get it. I want to die. I don't want to die.
But how do we translate that? How do we translate that into what's going on?
Could I just add one thing on there? And that term cultural competency comes up a lot when we're talking about diversity in clinical trials. Yeah. And to your point, Dr. Crawford, the house is on fire. You know how much longer it's going to take somebody to be culturally competent, right? Because their stages to competency, right? So you just don't jump out being confident. So what we'd like to say is cultural sensitive, right? And so you don't know what you don't know. So just understand that, say, hey, look, I don't understand. There's some things I don't understand. Help me understand. That's just being sensitive to that person's culture. That's being sensitive to their gender, to their ethnicity, to whatever lens, whatever they're presenting to that office. Just say, hey, look, I don't know what I don't know. Help me understand, because I don't want to offend you. That alone can be enough to break down those barriers of communication and help them become more engaged. And they're saying, hey, look, they're interested in me, and they're really taking the time to understand that they don't know about me, and so I can help them out. Versus that bias really filters how we see people and how we see situations. And so if we can just get site administrators, while we're trying to train more diverse working force in clinical trials, we can get some folks to say, you know what I don't know, help me understand.
Yeah, and I
I-
would like to add that we do provide that training. It's called the cross-culture communication. Using one of the methods is the teach-back method, where the sites are, trained on understanding that when you're engaging with a patient from a different culture, and someone could be speaking multiple languages. Like, for instance, I'm speaking English, but I do speak other multiple languages. So my understanding of English could be different. I'm giving an example. So with the teach back method, if if the site staff or PI says a word, he has to ask the patient to repeat back what he says, because that's when there's that barometer to really see, maybe the patient did not really understand the verbiage that I'm using. Then that entails pivoting from that language and finding ways of communicating in a language that the patient can be able to understand.
If I can also mention, I mean, in scientific research, when we're trying to recruit patients into studies, not even interventional studies, but we're, in need of participation to get access to either information or, biospecimen, because we're actually trying to develop, drugs for additional clinical trials, if you will. We have some of these same barriers. We always talk about community engagement, going out into the community and educating the community, but I just want to reiterate, some of this needs to be clinic facing. And while we are, as you say, trying to educate our clinics and our site coordinators, we definitely have to think about the clinic facing training, and it can't be something that we just ignore. I mean, or let slide by, because we're talking about generations of medical students. So I'm now at a medical college, in Atlanta, Morehouse Medical School of Medicine. And, I think, as we are training this diverse workforce, I'm also putting it to them to, think about when you get into the workforce and you have colleagues that don't look like you and you're representing your community, you also are going to be keepers of this knowledge of, the cultures that you come from, and, use every opportunity to be an opportunity to teach others. I think that, especially in the context of clinical trials, they have to understand what we're talking about before they need them. And I think that's also a barrier. I mean, we're talking about in a situation where I am faced with trusting someone to save my life, and I already feel like they don't really value my life, right? For whatever implicit bias I may have coming to the table, I need to hear, before I need this, from a trustworthy source what it is. And so,
Yes.
this type of forum, before I ever need a clinical trial, I already need to come to the table knowing what it is, so that no matter who it is sitting across the table from me, even if I don't trust you to know what's best for me, or to understand who I am, or to understand, really my background, I know enough about what I need, or at least, broadly what it is, that, I don't necessarily shy away from the opportunity, or you can't hide it from me. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter to me what city I go to. I can find a Target or a Walmart because I know what's in a Target or a Walmart, so to speak. I don't necessarily need to, trust someone at the post office to tell me where the Walmart is, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? I know it's like an odd way to put it, but I just think that this needs to be everyday language. We need to be comfortable in our household talking about clinical trials, just as we are comfortable talking about the products that we use every day. As we talk about finding a dentist, or finding a primary care physician, finding a remedy for a cold, we need to be comfortable talking about finding a remedy to treat cancer.
Ellis.
Amen.
I'm sorry, Karen.
I was just gonna say, it's just so critical, as you said, to introduce this language early so that clinical trials becomes a part of the conversation. So for healthcare professionals, when we are educating at the medical school level, training our fellows, and also encouraging sites to do things like role play, because that's also important, because as when we think about diversity, or sometimes when they think about diversity, they think about it from just a race perspective. But we know that diversity is more than that. It is all of us, and it is the intersection of that race with your age that guides the experience. If you are from a sexual or gender minority, it guides your experience. If you have multiple conditions that may impact your enrollment. So for pharmaceutical companies, they're also working on health literacy to make sure that the materials that are provided are on a reading level that is universal. And there is work to do. We're focused on doing that as well. And what I'll also say is, though the runway is long, until we are all culturally competent and appropriate in our language, it's equally important to have forums like this so that we empower the patient, so that when they are faced with the bias or assumptions made about if they're going to attend a visit or if they're ready to take on this trial, they can recognize that that bias may be at play and know to ask questions or bring other family members to the conversations or the visit, so it makes their participation in a trial easier.
Oh, Ellis, I just wanted to ask a quick question. We were doing something that we find that works out very well, what we call learning sessions. And the learning session is that, in this case, again, I work with prostate cancer patients or people who are interested in clinical trials. We take the patient and bring them in contact with the physicians who are conducting a clinical trial. And those that are conducting the clinical trial will talk about the clinical trial to the patient. So you take away this whole mystique about clinical trials and a specific clinical trial. And what we found is that after we complete the learning session, that the literacy, or how much the people understand about clinical trials, is improved significantly about a clinical trial. But also the perception that the doctor has changed, because the doctor has really never had an opportunity to really candidly speak with the patient and really understand what their concerns are. They know what they think their concerns are. But in the case of a cancer patient, and especially those who may live in the North versus those that live in the South, everybody has geographical differences on what concerns are. So we find that works out, and we find that patients are more receptive to participate in clinical trials after more of that fireside chat discussion with the patient.
So I just want to interject. A lot of people, when I say I'm a community medicine doctor, they don't understand what it is that I do. And I tell them I'm 100% community and I'm 100% medicine. Part of it had largely due to the fact that I had a sister that was 14 years younger, that when I was in med school and I would ask what she learned in school, she would tell me about long dividend and the muscles and the times. And I'd tell her about the Krebs cycle, and she's like, "Who's that?" I'm like, "It's how you process glucose." "What's that?" So I'd have to break things down until she understood, because my grandmother said, if you can't explain it to your baby sister, you don't know it. So that's the community had. So I'm able to look at things from the medical side, because I had to pay for it and take a couple classes to get it. But the community side, because I was always reminded by my family that I am Eric first, which allows me to understand that in the sender message receiver equation, if you spend so much time in school, you think it's a lecture to an audience and students and blah, 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 blah. Well, life doesn't work that way. It's actually a two-way street. There is a bidirectional arrow with two sides, where you learn as much from each interaction as you do as you give out, right? So it's mutual respect. The problem that I've run into over the last 20, 25 years with clinical trials is that we're bringing it to our community as though it is, a lot of times the conversation doesn't come up until it's a last ditch effort or it's something novel. Where it doesn't jive up is the fact that our clinical trials as a whole, the perception is that, well, there's nothing wrong. That must mean that, oh my God, is there nothing else that can be done? You want to make me a guinea pig? as opposed to normalizing the conversations about saying that, listen, the Advil, like you mentioned earlier, Advil, that was a clinical trial. If you can't afford your medication, there might be a clinical trial for a phase 3 or even a phase 4 study for a re-up where you can get your medicine for free. And that's always a hook. You'll get concierge medicine, you'll get free meds, the whole nine. So we need to really look at the perception. What is the situation and what audience are we talking to? Are we talking general education? We want their minds to be open so that they can look. We have someone in the chat that say, I'm happy to volunteer. So there is a clinical trial there's a clinical trial available on every topic, but it might not be for everyone. We just want to be included in the number for the benefits, but it's not something that is a last ditch. It's not an experiment.
It's not a sugar pill.
It's not a sugar pill.
It's not a sugar pill. It's not a sugar pill.
Not a sugar.
Well,
Okay. So I think, can we universally dispel that myth that it's not a sugar pill? All right.
It's
So
not
we're
a sugar pill.
folks.
It is not a sugar pill.
It's not a sugar pill.
You guys are so awesome. You guys are so awesome. This is so hard because I want to have everybody on the screen, right? This is so great. So great. I think so much
We
to
can. We'll bring in a couple more.
yeah, let's bring in our breasties. Can we bring in my
Let's bring in
breasties?
a couple of your breasties. Yeah.
Yeah. I love my breasties. They're awesome. And they're doing great work. Hey, Laura. Laura's actually speaking at Duke today. So, hey, Michelle. And Michelle's on mom duty.
Yes, hi everyone.
So great to see you guys. So you guys, we've been having this great discussion about, just bringing awareness to clinical trials, normalizing it into our lives, like saying, we should be learning this in biology class in 10th grade. We should be talking about it at the kitchen table. And I think you guys are living this work. So we have, both of these women are like amazing metastatic breast cancer breasties. Okay. They are like phenomenal women. And are making a huge impact in their communities. So, Laura, I'm going to let you talk first since you have to go in a little bit and be a brainiac at Duke. So what do you think about this whole conversation? And Laura's been focusing on genetics and genomics, which is like another whole, as Melissa knows, a whole like new language for people to learn about, and what you need to know about to get into a trial that's going to work for you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I am talking to about 300 physician researchers across the nation and the world. I met someone from Canada, challenging those physicians to provide more equitable care, be more inclusive. As we think about where the industry is going, and I say the industry, meaning oncology, cancer, it's this term called precision oncology, which means really targeted towards the cancer type that you have, the things that promote cancer growing in your body that need to be stopped or started inside of you. And it's really precise to who you are. And so as the industry is developing these drug therapies, these cures around the specific type of cancer that you have, it's so important that we as Black people are included in the science. When they're looking for mutations, things that are driving our cancers, we need to be in that data set. Our body tissue needs to be there so that when they're developing these drugs, these blockbuster drugs, they're not excluding us. When they're discovering what is driving our cancers, it's so important for us to be at the table and for our bodies and our genes, our tissue to be studied so that when they're looking for things that are driving our cancer, we're included. And that's the mission that I'm on, because clinical trials more and more are requiring people with certain what's called mutations, where your genes just aren't quite matching up right. That they're looking for people with certain types of mutations, and we have to be in that number. And right now, we're only about 20% referred to genetic or what's called genomic testing to determine what these things are, biomarkers are in our bodies. So we've got to be at the table, and we've got to have our data in the data set.
Awesome. We do. We have to be here. We have to be here.
And I have an analogy once, if we want to, like you talk about breaking it down. The analogy is you think about a hydrangea bush, right? It has beautiful, you can have blue flowers, pink flowers, purple flowers. That seed that goes in the ground is like your genetics. It's what you inherited from your mother and your father. And that says, I'm going to be a hydrangea no matter what. But then you think about the soil and the water and the sun and what might be next to it. Those are all those other environmental factors that impact how big that plant grows, how bright the blooms are, and what color they turn. And maybe it was supposed to be all blue hydrangeas, but then there's this one pink bloom that's what we call a mutation. It didn't quite go right. And so you have to cut that off and look inside and say, what's driving this particular stem to produce this one pink flower, like it's a tumor? And that's what we call the genomics, the makeup of what that tumor is. And knowing what that is helps you then say, well, I need to change the soil pH, or I need to water it more, or move it away from this coffee plant because that's driving acidity. That's the combination of your genetics and your environmental factors that make you who you are and make some tumors grow in you that might not grow in other people. And that's the analogy we use to try to break it down a little bit.
I love that analogy. I'm a genomicist, and I have never thought about it that way before. And, you know, I think about talking to older women in the community who grow hydrangeas in their yards, and I think that would be like the perfect analogy. I'm going to definitely credit you because I'm going to use.
Yes, you credit me. I have a video. We created an animation that shows it. So let's talk after this. Trying to break.
Yeah, we'll post that. We'll post that, Laura. Send me the video. Send me the video. That's awesome. That's awesome.
That would be amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I just chime in on what she just said too. I mean, you know, she's absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the work that we do. So, you know, as I mentioned, I'm a genomicist, and we study the African diaspora. So I work with a breast surgeon who's based in New York, Lisa Newman, but we have an international cohort where we look at African women in Africa, from West Africa and East Africa. And we're discovering genes that are unique to our ancestry group. We're discovering risk genes that are not currently on any common risk panels right now, you know? And so that's why it's so important that we are a part of some of this basic science, because if we hadn't done this work, if we hadn't been purposely and intentionally studying this background, this genetic background, we would have never discovered this. It would have just continued to be an unknown. It would have continued to be sort of this preconceived notion that it's all just social determinants. We know that there are differences in our biology. We see it, you know, in the differences in the way we look. We know that, you know, phenotypes, so your physical traits, are driven by genes. And we know then the way the diseases can progress can be driven by genes. And we just have not really studied the diversity in the population well enough to appreciate those differences. We see it manifest in the disparities that we can't always explain by socioeconomic status. We know that there are populations within the Black community who are affluent, but they are still dying more than white patients who live in poverty. So we really need to make sure that we are represented, especially as the technology increases, as you know, artificial intelligence comes into play. If you put in bad information, you're going to get bad things out of it when you try to apply it across the general public. It's so very important. Your role is so very important. I'm so glad to meet you. I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing.
That's great. I can't believe you guys have never met. I'm going to hook you up.
I did speak with Dr. Lisa Newman. We were both speakers last weekend. So I'm very familiar with the work that you do. And your name was mentioned during that. I was speaking to you about 200 research scientists, including early career scientists. And I spent this past Monday talking to first-year medical students at Johns Hopkins to encourage them to be more equitable in their treatment. So
wonderful.
We're making the rounds here.
Wonderful.
We're making the rounds. That's great. And, you know, Melissa's at Morehouse Medical School. So So, gosh, you guys, I mean, I think all of this is so important. And, you know, I love Laura's hashtag is Black Genes Matter. We're going to have a
Yes,
Black
we
Genes
just did a
Matter.
study. Oh gosh.
Okay.
And once, well, if you're willing, I'll talk to you about some of the results of the study about Black Genes Matter. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah. So, Michelle, you're on mom duty, so we'll see what you're up to. And you know, tell us, this is what metastatic breast cancer looks like, okay? Are these women amazing? I mean, really, right? They're taking their illness and making it their purpose. So thank you guys.
Definitely. So I just wanted to add to even the genomics conversation. I am a healthcare administrator, but I am also a patient advocate. But I was lucky enough, my oncologist is the director of genomics at my hospital. So he does a lot of, I know all about the biomarkers and the gene breakdown and the mutations of genes, and the PD-L1s and MSIs, and how your tumor can pick up genes after treatment and they mutate and it can become resistant to certain drugs, and how certain mutations make you eligible for immunotherapy. And what was great about just our relationship, and this is one of the things that I also encourage other women in the cancer community and also men, is although we have this mistrust about clinical trials, right? Finding someone that is in the community that you can speak to, just to get the backside of it, right? And to be able to get your answers and your questions and your concerns out there, but also taking the time to educate yourself on the different components of it so that you are part of the conversation. So I was first diagnosed with stage 1 triple negative breast cancer at the age of 36. And unfortunately, I had a reoccurrence last year at the age of 39, and I'm metastatic. But what helped me with that transition was knowing that, one, I had already immersed myself into my illness and wanting to be an advocate in a difference, right? I'm a mom. I have 2 children. I have a 6-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. And from the very first day I was diagnosed, I wanted to create a legacy. Creating a legacy means creating change, and being part of that change. And in order for that change to happen, I have to be a participant. I can't wait for other people to do it for me. So once I found out that I was metastatic, I made sure to educate myself on my pathology report. I made sure to, words I didn't understand, I reached out to colleagues that are within the community that, went through clinical trials, and I did my research to find out what those things meant. I also looked up clinical trials that I might be eligible for. But what was a great advantage of mine that most people don't necessarily have is that my medical team was doing the same work. So when we came for that meeting, we're at stage 4 now. It was a business meeting. We had our binders and our notes, and the clinical trial that I'm currently in was not in New York at all. My hospital was the first hospital to get it. It's a phase 3 clinical trial for metastatic breast cancer. It's a targeted therapy treatment. I've been on it since November, and I'm almost at a complete response. I've had 10 treatments already. I go every 3 weeks. But I was fully educated on the clinical trial, the side effects, what can happen, what cannot happen. But also I was more prepared to just be able to be open-minded and have a different mindset. And often as a patient advocate, I also run my own organization called the Fearless Warrior Project, where I coach other women and men to just, embrace their new normal, but also educate and change their mindset and address their mental and emotional health, right? Because clinical trials in our community is about mistrust, but it's also about lack of education. It's also about having a tunnel-like vision of what you've been told, what will happen, and being able to say, you know what, I'm going to jump out the plane with no parachute. So for me, being diagnosed with stage 4 at 39, I had to come to grips with, okay, if this is my story, I'm going to jump out the plane with no parachute. I'm going to give it my all, and whatever happens, happens. And it didn't take, for me necessarily, it didn't take much for me to be convinced. But I also know from speaking to peers in my community, a lot of us just want the knowledge and want the resources. And once you break it down to us and explain to us the niche, the bolts, and the crannies, we're not resistant. You know, we might be resistant that first time going to that appointment. You might need a support person with you. But once you see, okay, I am now some control of my situation, I'm regaining back some of that control, you start to feel empowered. And one of the things that I do, I document my journey. I'm in a clinical trial. I do TikTok videos with my husband at every treatment. I document every appointment that I go to. I have to go to scans for every 6 weeks. But I also incorporate my children. So my 6-year-old daughter writes blogs. She's come into the hospital. She's interviewed my doctors. She's interviewed a research team. She understands what a clinical trial is, you know, and it starts at the household. It starts educating our children and our family members that we have a voice and we have to start implementing it and using it. But it also is about educating, breaking that generational curse. Because my goal as a mom, you know, I'm full aware I have metastatic breast cancer. I'm full aware of the statistics. But my job as a mom is to make sure that when my daughter's of age, she is empowered and equipped to be able to handle her own conversations and not take no as an answer. Not take you're too young, or you don't have to worry about it. You're too young, sweetheart. You don't. No, my mom had triple negative breast cancer at the age of 36. So I am supposed to start getting mammograms at 25. You're not going to tell me no. And these are things that we have to really start empowering our children and even our elders, you know, empowering our children and our elders to show them that you are the superhero in your life. You have to be ready, willing, and able to fight for what's yours. Don't allow the word no to be your stop.
Yes. I will pass the plate. I promise you, Michelle. Woo.
I know. Amen. Right.
There's a lot to unpack there. So Laura, if you would, please kind of help people understand the power of genetics and understand that it's not a one-to-one thing. And what I mean by one-to-one is, let's say like mom's had breast cancer, but there is something in that genetics that can make her son susceptible to prostate cancer. So can you talk to us about that? How the genetics is not one-to-one; it's just part of your whole makeup.
Oh, yes, I will. But of course, we have a physician and a researcher on too. And I am not either one of those, although we have done some research. So remember that you inherit your DNA from your mother and your father. So if your father had prostate cancer, you are at risk. If your mom or someone in your mom's side had breast cancer, you are at risk. Not only women, but men. So if on either side of your family, and that's why it's so important to document your family health history and to know it, then you are considered high risk. And that means that my sons have had genetic testing, right? Because I could have passed it on to them. And that is something that we need to make sure we know. And they could be susceptible to either prostate or breast cancer themselves. So that's important. We're not leaving men out of the equation. But if you don't know your family history, we did a series. We kicked it off in Black History Month. Ricky mentioned Black Genes Matter. Have an epidemiologist, a geneticist, medical oncologist, as well as a Previvor on our show, Soul Filling Our Sisters. And we got feedback from a person who went to Black Genes Matter, she and her sister started to document their family, started to ask questions. And it's I know in our community, sometimes we don't want to share that, but it's a way to say, hey, grandma, this would help me know what, maybe save my life if you tell me what happened and what you had. Well, what she did was she and her sister started asking questions. Good Lord, her aunts, 3 of her aunts had breast cancer. 1 had brain cancer. Uncle had prostate cancer. Great grandmother, it was running in her family, and she didn't know. And now she knows. And to the control piece that my sister Michelle was talking about, it's important. It allows you to have the information to then take an action. Then you need to be enrolled in a high-risk breast center, a high-risk breast clinic. And that means that you're going to be monitored more closely, more often. You're going to get the genetic testing. You're going to have people who understand what it means to be high risk. In July of 2021, the American College of Radiology declared that just being a Black woman, just being Black, means you're high risk. And that helps you with your insurance coverage. It helps you get the tests that you deserve and need. And so the genetic piece is so important. And yes, only let's say 10% of breast cancers are determined to be genetic. However, these other risk factors also come into play. But when you understand 200,000 people get diagnosed with breast cancer, if you're one of those 20,000 where the genetics matter, it matters to you. And so don't you want to know? Don't you want to know? And so you can do something about it to be preventive, to lower your risk, and to be monitored more closely so that you're catching things early. You're catching things at a stage where you're able to have more curative therapies, and that you're at the table and part of the conversation. And so that the genetic piece and talking to your family members about what your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, your parents, siblings, cousins, right? Because remember, your cousins, they're inheriting things from your grandparents, right? So having that conversation, whether it's at the family reunion, at the kitchen table, and talking to them in a way that's accessible and not intrusive, but saying that you're helping the next generation live and live longer. And getting ways and tools to do that are just so important. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about the genetic aspect of this particular disease. It's really important because it heightens your risk, makes you eligible for insurance coverage, makes you eligible for a high-risk breast center, and makes you eligible to be in more control of your health destiny.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Laura. And it's interesting because we do need to have these conversations. And so, we launched our Love of My Girls campaign a couple of months ago, and we actually built a toolkit for young women, for really anybody. If you go to loveofmygirls.org, and I put it in the comments, we have a worksheet that you can take and have these conversations with your grandmothers on both sides of your family, because we know they want to talk about it, but help you facilitate these family conversations that are so important. So we have a tool just to help you do that, because, we know that, our families don't talk about it until Uncle Pookie gets his leg amputated, or till, Grandma Edith is in the hospital. Well, how'd that happen? So we have to force these conversations. For my family, I actually don't let them eat Thanksgiving dinner until they give a report on their blood pressure, their A1C, when was the last mammogram, when was their PSA, and you want to eat the turkey I cooked, we got to talk. And so I forced it on my family, but we all have to do that, because the secrets that our families are keeping are killing us. Yeah. And then also I would add, I don't have a genetic mutation from my triple negative, but I had to call my mother's great aunt. She was 102. She lived to be 103. When she was 101, I talked to her, and she actually remembered that, and she was on my mother's father's side of the family. She remembered that my mother's aunt, my grandmother's sister, my mother's aunt, died at 42 from breast cancer, that my mother didn't even remember, because my mother was only 9 at the time, and my grandmother never talked about it. And it took my 102-year-old great aunt to remember, yeah, that's right, Ricky, we did have breast cancer in the family. And so even though I don't have a gene, now my daughters are at risk because my mother's aunt, my mother, me, and now what's next for them. So we have to force these family conversations.
Well,
we really do. Like, we just did a study. Oh, I'm sorry, Alex, go right ahead.
Yeah, let me just reset. We're here talking about International Clinical Trials Day. So breast cancer is a big part of clinical trials. We've also had Dr. Keith Crawford on talking about prostate cancer. So we're talking about it just in a general sense, how clinical trials really improve health outcomes. So I want to address something that's in the comments right now from Craig, and he's asking a very serious question about money, right? And so when we're talking about getting involved in clinical trials, and we're talking about insurance and healthcare, there inexplicably linked, right? You can't, it's hard to
Oh, yeah.
However, clinical trials, to my knowledge, and Melissa, you can help me out with this one, are at no cost. And so
Right.
that's another benefit for getting involved in clinical trials and enrolling in clinical trials, even if you don't have insurance, even if you don't have a lot of money. Clinical trials can be an avenue to you getting world-class treatment, world-class cutting-edge medications at no cost to you. So that's another benefit for these clinical trials, because you're not
Yes.
going to come out of pocket for them at all. And
And
many
you
of them
also
will
get a lot of
cover your,
creature comforts, your transportation,
yes.
childcare, all those kinds of things. And I think the other benefit too, like you're getting this quality of care that's just amazing. And even Michelle said earlier, you're getting scans. So if you just went on chemo today, you probably wouldn't get a scan for 3 months to know whether the drug is working in your body or not. And frankly, when you're doing that chemo right now, you're in a clinical trial right now because you don't know if that drug is going to work in your body anyway, right? But in a trial situation, you're going to get scanned in 6 weeks, a month, and know I am on track. This is working for me. And as to Michelle's point, she's getting cured on this trial. So money, it's really a best situation to be in from the money perspective.
Yep.
I also
Else,
wanted to add. Oh,
go ahead.
I also wanted to add from the previous discussion about prostate, and how the importance of educating families on also prostate cancer and breast cancer. I am the first person in my family to have breast cancer, but I have my oldest brother is stage 4 prostate cancer. My grandfather had prostate cancer. My uncle had prostate cancer. So even family, we are very in depthly researching the connection of prostate cancer and breast cancer. My genetic testing, I didn't have any of the mutations that were genetic to my family members. The prostate cancer is heavily on our men's side of my house, my family. My son, my teen, he sees a urologist. Just want to preventative on either side.
Michelle, you're breaking up a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit. It's hard to hear you. I guess I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, it's hard to hear you. But I think we got the gist of it in terms of when we're talking about genetics and how it's not and that's what Laura was talking about. And that's what we wanted to make sure that people understand. It's not a one-to-one thing. If it's in your gene pool, then there's a possibility of you getting. And I think that's what you were illustrating there. So just because somebody didn't have breast cancer, somebody did have cancer that's in your direct line of descent, and so therefore that could have been a reason why you're developing it. I think when we're talking about clinical trials, there are, and we touched on the boogeyman in the room, right? Doc Griggs' video did a great job in terms of that elephant in the room with regards to, all right, what happened in the past, right? And so, yes, we understand what's happening in the past, and we're not trying to gloss over that at all. But what we're saying is this, and at what point, as you can see, all of these faces on this screen, on these screens today, were brown and black faces, right? And we're in this space, right? And so when we're talking about what happened with the syphilis study, that was 1932 when that study began. All right. And so I think life for Black Americans was a little bit different in 1932. I'm going out on a limb there and making just a guess. It was a little bit different in 1932 for Black folks. Yes, there were Black doctors at that time, but there was really less power. Also, after that it got exposed in 1972, so it was 40 years that study was done, and it got exposed by a whistleblower. A lot of things have been put in place to safeguard from those type of things happening again, right? Rules have been put in place, as well as having laws have been put in place, as well as Black faces being more prominent in these spaces. So we had, even during the COVID and the development of those, and those trials were going on, there were Black researchers part of it on every phase, from the development of the vaccines to the review of once the vaccine started getting rolled out they reviewed every step of the way across it. We could talk about James Hildreth at Meharry College was on one. We could talk about Oliver Brooks out in California.
Yeah.
He reviewed California standards. So we could talk about so many Black faces that weren't there, that weren't even allowed in those rooms in 1932. So it's been over 50 years since Tuskegee, right? We cannot continue. We cannot, in order for our health and for our survival in this country, we cannot continue to withhold participation in these clinical trials that are going to help generations to come of Black people. We cannot withhold that for something that happened now over 90 years ago when it started, 50 years ago when it ended. We have to at some point accept that there has been some progress made, right? And we're not where we want to be. That's a whole nother discussion, not for here today. But what I'm saying is that some progress has been made, and we've got to continue to engage in that. And we're doing that on so many different levels. So I'm off my soapbox. I'm bringing other folks back in. We can bring that Dr. Crawford back.
I was going to.
And Ellis, bring people back. And these diseases are killing us. Black women have a 41% higher higher mortality rate of breast cancer than white women, a higher recurrence rate. Prostate cancer, we're dying at multiple rates versus white people. We need drugs. We need drugs for our bodies. We need the science. We really have to advance the science. I don't want anybody to get breast cancer, but I definitely don't want my children and my grandchildren to get it. That's what I work for. And unless we have the science, and Michelle's daughter is protected, and Laura's sons are protected, and my children are protected, all of our kids and Melissa's kids are protected, and your kids are protected. We have to make the science happen for them, for our children. And, we have to advance it. We have to. It's got to get better for Black people. It just does on every disease front.
Well, Ricky, could you emphasize one thing? And that is when we talk about the age of Black women, there's a clear demarcation between when Black women become developing breast cancer more than white women at an earlier stage because we because of go. I'm sorry.
I was going to say Black women under 35 get breast cancer at twice the rate of white women and die at 3 times the rate. 40% of triple negative breast cancer, our worst one, our women are under 40. And so getting a mammogram at 40, and we have this new guidance that came out, it's not good enough for us. We are at high risk for breast cancer, and we have to do better. Look at our Michelle here, 36, she got breast cancer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the ladies that I've been speaking with Ricky at some of the HBCUs are at 19 and 20.
Right, but what that suggests is that the guidelines that come out are based on clinical trials and studies. So when we're not in the study, when our data is not in the study, that age range gets set without us.
Exactly.
The thresholds of what's called standard of care get set without us in mind. That suggests to me that no one of these 19 and 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds was in the study because those ages
dictated that. Hello. Yeah.
And to bring it back full circle, because I'm the geneticist here, right? That earlier onset. So we know that cancer typically is a disease of old age, and anything that's a disease of old age that has an early onset, that is an indication that there's a genetic predisposition. All that simply means is that there's a genetic component that drives it to occur earlier in life for a certain group of people. That's how, for instance, the BRCA gene was discovered, because as they looked at the transmission of molecular markers through these large families where they had these impeccable family histories, they were able to demarcate everybody in a pedigree, their health history, and the age at the penetrance of the disease. That's how they were able to identify this gene. So when you guys are talking about not having a cancer gene, but I have family members who had cancer at these very young ages, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking there is something but we just don't know what it is yet, because 95% of the data that underlies the genome-wide association studies, which is just a fancy way of saying the DNA studies that we use to identify the genetic markers for genetic disease risk, came from people of European ancestry. And when there were any indicators in those studies of any variants that were specific to a certain group, like a Black group or a Hispanic group, they erased them by the way that they analyzed the data. And so we literally erased the risk genes that were specific to our population. And so that's why it's also important that we are a part of the data now. We have to come back and reassess our genetic background and identify what these risk genes are, because we have them. We just don't know what they are.
That is, you're absolutely right. So we have been talking about clinical trials. We've even gotten down to genes and things like that. So as we're getting close to the end of this discussion, what I'd like to do is, one, let's have some success stories, right? So let's share some success stories, particularly with our partners, Carmen and Damali, kind of talk about what your organizations are doing in order to kind of bridge that gap of kind of diversity in clinical trials, and then what are you planning to do, or what are your organizations planning to do going forward to help get encouraged to get more diversity so we can have greater outcomes for people of color?
So we're collaborating with a number of partners, minority serving institutions, including HBCUs, to provide education. We also conduct a program called Breakthroughs for All, and it is both an in-person and online program. So virtually, if you ever go to PfizerClinicalTrials.com, we also have information available in Spanish on Pfizer Estudios Clínicos. But in those settings, there's a community calendar where we post information where people can find events in their neighborhood. But we also have our Breakthroughs for All virtual sessions, which people can join at any time. And some of the successes that have come out of that is we invite participants in clinical trials, as well as practitioners and physicians who conduct clinical trials, to have real conversations to introduce the concept. And we have a survey at the beginning and then a survey at the end. And from our participation over the last year, we have found that 90% of all of the participants have noted that they've increased their understanding of clinical trials, and that they will talk to their physicians about clinical trials to participate in. We are also working with a number of organizations to get education directly into the community. So through mobile units and offering healthcare screenings and connecting the dots and introducing clinical trials into the healthcare continuum as an option so that it's introduced early. We understand the runway for consideration can be long for many, but you have to understand, have exposure, engage with those who are trustworthy or who you find trustworthy, have conversations within your household, and then when you're introduced with the clinical trial, you have the information you need to join one. So those are a couple of the things that we're doing in community.
We also have a really cool video that we made. Well, we can show that at the end, Ellis. We're about to close.
Yeah, Damali.
Yes, so I would say for us, engaging and involving underrepresented communities in clinical trials, it's starting from within, and that means that we, as part of our ways of working, we do have processes of how we can plan out how we want to engage with the communities, and this involves working with patient advocacy groups. That's one approach, because we do know they are the trusted voices, as well as engaging with community-based organizations. These, for instance, they could be faith-based organizations as churches, and we can think of organizations such as those cultural centers within the communities to bring that awareness about clinical trials. And secondly, we do also participate in the Beacon of Hope collaboration. And what this helps us is to bring clinical trials closer to the patients where they are. This helps to meet, to solve the problem of transportation issues. The closer the sites are, the better for patients to easily be able to go in and participate in those trials. But we do also support these research studies in terms of making sure they are ready to conduct the trials and they do have adequate staff, because we can have the institutes or the clinical sites, but if they don't have enough resources to conduct the trials, then the patients that are interested will not be able to participate in the trials because those resources are not available. So we do support sites with resources for them to be able to operate within the communities. And I did mention, I think earlier, about how we are working to make sure we have a diverse clinical research workforce. We are partnering with an organization so that we support community college students to develop a path of, for their career to be able to get training into clinical research and be certified so that they can consider clinical research. We also do participate in the National Medical Fellowship Clinical Research University. This helps us to increase the pool of diverse principal investigators to conduct research within our communities. So those are some of the best practices that we are doing from our end.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
We've got a great video that we're going to, I know it's going to be hard to beat the cartoon rap from Dr. Griggs earlier. So, but we're going to do our best.
Okay, Carmen helped me do this. Carmen helped us do this, and we're trying to do this a lot, so.
Oh, fantastic. So we're going to play this video here. And then as the video is playing, I want all of our guests to kind of think about your final thoughts, because we're going to go round robin and get everybody's final thoughts as we're closing up this great discussion today. So let's make sure I got the right. There we go.
It's coming.
Participate in that. Well, shoot, it saved my life. The drug hasn't reached the market yet, but I'm alive. Without participating, we don't know the true efficacy. We have to participate.
Can you try to start over?
Research work.
Can you start over?
I am a stage 4 triple negative breast, the first in the nation to join the trial that I did. To be able to participate in that was huge. It saved my life. The drug hasn't reached the market yet, but I'm alive. Without participating, we don't know the true efficacy. We have to participate. Research is moving forward. We don't want to be left behind.
I'll put the link in the comments. You
Yeah, I
got
apologize for
yeah.
that. I don't know what's going on. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a great video. We'll put the link in the comments if you want to watch it. It's a fantastic video, really kind of
Put the link
supporting
in the comments. Yeah.
what's really the importance of breast cancer, not even just breast cancer, but clinical trials and participating in clinical trials. You heard her say, hopefully you heard her say that she was getting medications that weren't even available to the public yet at that time. And so we're talking
Right.
about, we've already dispelled the myth. So this is going to be my final thought. Number one, no sugar pill. We've already dispelled that earlier today. There's not a sugar pill that's happening. Number two, there's no cost, right? There's no cost to you. So we're going to talk about the things that I want you to walk away with. So that's what everybody's final thought is. One, no sugar pill. Two, no cost to you. Three, you're getting the best and most cutting edge treatments available on the market at that time. And you're going to be monitored not only for that, you're going to be monitored the whole time. And we're doing a better job. Companies, organizations engaged, we're all doing a better job of coming together and making sure that whether on that continuum from cultural competence to cultural sensitivity, we're going to make sure that people of color are not only represented, but we're being heard in these processes. And so those are my takeaways from this wonderful discussion today.
Great. Laura, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much. So a couple comments. One, know your family health history. That's important. Get your genetic testing. And if you have breast cancer, make sure you're getting the genomic testing as well. We did a study, Black Genes Matter study. Over 325 Black men and women responded to that survey, and indicated 84% of them didn't have a lot of familiarity with the testing. So we've got some work to do. But 81% of them wanted to know if they have a risk of cancer, men and women. And so we are here to be your partners in this journey. If there's an opportunity for us to help you in any way, bring this message to your communities, we are here to make sure that happens, because we've got to get the knowledge in our community so people can be empowered to act and be the own quarterback of their own care, and you can be control and to get the health care that you deserve.
Who's next?
Keith.
I'll go next. Oh.
Okay. Go.
I'll go next. So one takeaway I want to leave with everyone is start having these conversations at home. Less gossip at the dinner table, more real deep conversations about family history. 2, you are your number one advocate. Don't be afraid to be fearless and determined about your life. It is your life. So when you're put in positions, or you're in a position where you hear news that you have an illness, become a superhero for yourself. Don't be afraid to ask those hard questions. And also educate everyone around you. The best part of going through a journey is having a team. And sometimes you have to build your team around you. They can be your kids, they can be your family members, they can be strangers that you never met. But build a team, because then you have people that's checking in and tapping in and holding each other accountable. But always remember, this is your life. You are in charge.
Thank you, Michelle. Dr. Crawford?
Oh, okay. Thank you again. I really enjoyed this, and the messages that I wanted to leave, just for clarification. Standard of care. Okay. And that's one of the other important things to know about your clinical trial. So when you're thinking of a clinical trial, and I use my ice cream sundae analogy, sorry about that, Ricky. It's like 3 scoops of ice cream, chocolate syrup, and nuts and whipped cream. That's your standard of care. And then 3 scoops of ice cream, chocolate syrup, whipped cream, nuts, and a cherry on top is the clinical trial. So you're always going to get, at a minimum in a clinical trial, the standard of care. That's what everybody's going to get. That's what everybody's going to get. That's what everyone's going to get anyway. And that's what the doctor's supposed to give to you. And so the other point I wanted to bring up to you is, remember, it's all that Black people and everyone, the federal government has stated you're going to get your best care if you participate in the clinical trial. So I say it again, you will get the best care if you participate in a clinical trial. And lastly, since my focus is on prostate, and Ricky and I tag team on bone health also. But the point is, if you know someone who is high risk, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you who has that high risk. Black men, period, are at high risk for prostate cancer. So that means every Black man you know needs to understand that there are tools out there from our Prostate Health Education Network, and especially for clinical trials, ventrials.com. I put it in the window. And I'm letting you know, I personally each month go through all of the actively recruiting clinical trials for prostate cancer. So they're up to date and they're waiting for folks. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And you see all those letters after his name. So he's smarter than a lot of y'all, than a lot of us.
But that's because I went to a HBCU.
Well, we know that too. We know that to be true. Okay. All right. So it is in the comments, fintrials.com. And I'm hoping that we can get Dr. Crawford to come and be part of our Men's Health Summit next month in June.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about prostate cancer in depth during that Men's Health Summit. So we'd love to have you as part of that to kind of really talk to Black men, because brothers, you know, we sometimes be lagging on these type of things. And so and it was that family history that drove me to start getting checked for prostate at 35, because my father had it and my grandfather had it, and so I knew they had a family history. So I didn't care I didn't know what the standards of care was, what the government recommendation was. I was like, 35, I'm gonna start getting checked, and that's
good. That's excellent. Okay, that is really excellent.
I may have just told my age there, but it is what it is. So, Melissa,
but you 36 though.
36. Oh yeah, the first one last year. That's a good one. I appreciate that, Dr. Crawford.
Yeah, that's very important. We did some good prostate cancer.
Melissa didn't put all her letters behind her name. Melissa didn't put all her
I know
letters.
she didn't.
Her
didn't.
titles can't even fit on the flyer. Her titles can't even fit on our flyers.
Couldn't even fit on the flyer. And then you gonna come up here and just put a name up here like you.
I'm just Melissa today. It's Saturday. Come on now. I'm about to go to Waffle House. It's all good. Listen. So my messages for today are that protections are in place. Okay. So we're talking about trials, but no one is treating you like a guinea pig. Okay. Trials save lives. This is the way we have rigorous science. Oftentimes, trials are the best options to save your life. And trials need diversity, because this is how we change the standard of care. This is how we get the best of the treatments to the rest of the community. The only way the standard of care, so that it can be delivered to every clinic across the country, no longer will it be that you have to be in a clinical trial in order to get the best drugs, is if we all start to participate. We have inclusion that is diverse, and we know that it's going to work across the population, and we have protections in place. So if you want to get information from a trustworthy source, see the people who are here, Touch Black Breast Cancer, Touch for Life, all of these great people here are wonderful resources, blackdoctor.org. Wonderful panel. I'm so happy that I was here today.
Absolutely. Carmen?
So I think it's important to remember that this is something that we are in together. And if we want to make the impossible possible, we have to have reflective representation in our trials so that we can bring the right medications to all of us. And so I encourage you to inform yourself, empower others, share the message, have the conversation early and have it often. And also that there are ways to get involved so that you can become informed, whether it's joining an advisory board or an IRB, or being an advocate in your community if you have been a patient or if you've participated in clinical trials you too can share your story. So I just encourage everyone to remain empowered and engaged.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, Damali, and then Ricky, you'll take us home.
Well, thank you. I would say for all things, things to be better for us all. I feel like I'm taking Carmen's points. We all have to be part of the solution, right? And it's going to take a village. And the village is not on the left or the north or the south or on the right side, but we are the village. So we have to contribute to the solution and for us all and the next generation. So thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be part of the panel.
Thank you so much. Ricky, can you hear us? I know she just mentioned she's having some technical difficulties, so I'd love to get her last word, but if we can't get it, definitely know that she has been instrumental. So I want to thank Touch the Black Breast Cancer Alliance for their partnership with BlackDoctor.org and getting this off the ground. I want to thank all of our guests that came in, our breasties, our professionals from Dr. Griggs, who had to leave, Dr. Crawford, Dr. Davis, even though you none of your credentials up there, but that's fine. We're gonna let that slide. We all family, so we're all good. So Damali and Carmen, just our partners in industry partners, just thank you so much. I will say your company, I'm sorry, Pfizer and Merck here represented. Thanks so much. Laura, I know you got a big speech, so we are going to be there with you in spirit at Duke and tell those Dukies that we know what we're doing and we are here and we got to get the geneticists going. So yeah, we are definitely happy to have you out there representing your organization and really just getting great information out. So Ricky, I think I have filibustered enough. I think you might be back here, so we'll get you on for your final words.
Yeah, I'm on twice. I'm going to leave the other one. I got it on my phone, technical difficulties. But I'm just so happy everybody's here with us today. I'm so happy that we did this and had this conversation. I think we need a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4, Ellis. So let's plan those. And it's International Clinical Trials Day. I don't know that anybody else in the world is celebrating that day except for us. So I'm so happy that we are doing this and starting this tradition. And I'm so grateful to my friends in this work. You guys are all, part of my family, and we can't do enough to save our lives. And I think we hope everybody learned a lot today about standard of care. And there is no sugar pill, and we're not guinea pigs. We are advancing science and we are saving lives. And everybody go to whenwetrial.org. If you need more information, or everybody knows how to reach me, Ricky at Touch BBCA, and join us every Wednesday where we talk about everything breast cancer. And everybody, be the CEO of your own health, be the girl boss of your own health, be the boy boss of your own health, and know that we have to do this work for ourselves. We can't depend on doctors, and demand the care that we deserve, and just stay healthy. Check your breasts that you love. I know you have a pair.
And with that, we will sign off, and we'll thank you for joining us here on this Saturday. And Ricky, we could do this on a quarterly basis, whenever you want to do it.
Yeah,
I'm echoing what Carmen said earlier. Anything for you, Ricky. Anything for you. So,
thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Y'all go have a blessed day.
Have a blessed day. Have a blessed day.